Hello, and welcome to this episode of Ruckcast. Ruckcast is your opportunity to listen in on unscripted conversations about cutting-edge Ruckus Wi-Fi and wired networking technology, Ruckus business, and just interesting innovations that impact the computer networking industry today and in the future. Ruckcast is brought to you directly from CommScope Ruckus Education. For more learning opportunities, be sure to log on to training.ruckuswireless.com and view content on our Ruckus Education YouTube channel. Simply search for Ruckus Education on your YouTube homepage. Without further ado, here's your host, Matt Clouda.
Brian Stewart, how are you?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Doing great. So we're going to talk about MCT stacking, and everybody listening to this is going to get to make fun of me at the same time because I already admitted that keep alive VLANs are necessary.
Yeah, they do definitely come in handy in that scenario. Yeah,
they do. And I still have, and we're all opinionated, right? And I still have an opinion that if you're not dealing with a modular chassis, just fine, whatever. Okay, we'll use a keep alive VLAN. And I've done it. And in the lab that we use, I've connected one and configured it, and it's there. So you win, like usual.
Well, and for full transparency, the third topic we're talking about today is Campus Fabrics. And so, I'll show my own, issues here as well. When Campus Fabrics initially released a few years ago, I was not much of a proponent for it. The first rollout of that technology was very limiting as far as the number of devices that could be in the fabric, the types of topologies you could do within that fabric, and I just was not a fan at all of the technology. And as it's continued to evolve, and as it's given you much greater port densities, things like that, I've become much more and more on board with it. So we both have, things that we've kind of come into this with and going, no, I'm not going to do that, initially. And then that's kind of changed over time.
Yeah, and for anybody listening to this, if you ever have the distinct opportunity to be on a support call and you're met with VU is probably the resident Campus Fabrics expert. He knows this stuff inside and out. I mean, he's dealt with rollouts of it at huge scales. He really has. If you're lucky enough to talk to him, you're going to get expert advice like you're going to get with Brian here. But you're right. I mean, from an instruction perspective, I've always struggled with Campus Fabrics and how to turn around and explain it in a way that's not, hey, you're going backwards.
Yeah. Yep. And maybe we'll fix that today. That's kind of part of the idea. So,
yeah.
So I think the big thing, and, to kind of set some context for this, as an education group, I think we do a really good job of teaching stacking.
Yep.
We do a really good job of teaching Campus Fabrics. We do a really good job of teaching MCT. But what we don't necessarily do such a good job is comparing these technologies and saying, when do you want to choose option A versus B versus C?
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think one of the things as a vendor, and this may just be my perception, but I think some customers probably look at this, and even, some of our resellers and partners, they look at this and go, what are you guys doing? You got three answers to the same problem, and they're out there thinking, like, are your R&D engineers that bored? They're just going to sit around and go, oh, okay, well, let's fix it a different way today, And it's like, no, there are distinct reasons for these. And so, today we're not going to spend a lot of time going into this is a stack, this is what a stack is, this is how a stack works, for any of these three, because we do that really well in our classes. So, if you want to get a good picture of that, go out to training.ruckuswireless.com. The ICX 150 implementer course has great coverage of what these technologies are.
Yep.
But again, it kind of lacks in that when do I choose option A versus B versus C category.
Yeah. You take any of this stuff and you look at it, and you can look at it with a blind eye and become confused immediately. And I'm guilty of it because I've done a show stack before and looked at the output, which is ASCII art, and thought, what in the heck is this? But then you sit down and you talk to somebody like yourself who knows it, and you're like, no, hold on. This is the actual ports and how they're connected. You're like, oh, okay, I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. So, a huge shout out to ourselves in the education department, because we've done a fantastic job of explaining this stuff in a way that unconfuses everybody.
Well, and I think to the engineering departments as well, because things like being in an environment that is totally CLI driven, but yet giving you a visual output of what your stack looks like or what your campus fabric looks like, I think that is just so incredible and awesome.
Oh, I can't disagree with you on that at all, because you're right. It is. I mean, you take somebody that's going to sit there and put a visual perspective on something that's physically cabled on the switch. It's just amazing. It really is.
Yeah. Yep. So let's dig into kind of some differences here and kind of some positives and negatives on each one of these, and where they make the most sense. So I guess I'll just throw it over to you from the perspective of which one of these do you want to hit first? Which one do you want to talk about first?
Let's do stacking. I think that's the not the bottom of the barrel, but I think that's a good.
I think it's the widest deployed.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense to start your base from there as well. So yeah, we can do that. So stacking is available across, most vendors in the industry, I would say. Now, a big difference, of course, between Ruckus and many other vendors is on a stack from a Ruckus perspective, we don't use any proprietary connectors. We don't use any proprietary port types. We're using 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gig as the overall stacking ports. You can do link aggregation groups between members inside the stack itself, and you can take up to 12 devices within the same ICX subfamily, convert those into a stack so you have a single point of management. So that logically is just as if it was a chassis that had 12 line cards.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this is where I think sales guys eat this up, and I think that's great, but at the same time, customers can eat that up too, because I need 3 devices in a stack right now. Now.
Yeah.
But next month, I'm going to exponentially grow. I might need 2 or 3. I'm not looking at replacing a chassis. I don't have to do a forklift upgrade. I just buy another switch, throw it in, add it to the stack, and guess what? Boom, I'm done.
Well, and not only that, but you have, when you're looking at chassis-based systems, you have that initial investment that if that growth potentially will reach that you would need to populate, 12 slots, you've got to start out by buying at least a 12-slot chassis.
Yep.
And that ain't cheap. Even though you're not buying the line cards today, buying that enclosure that actually gives you that much scalability is really expensive. So being able to get into what is functionally a similar solution, but allows you to do it at a much lower cost of entry and then expand as you go is incredibly valuable to the customers.
Yep. And on top of that, so I don't think any vendor can sit here and have a conversation and say, "Oh, we're perfect," because you're not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We've had our knocks on the chin, right? And Jose Martel and I talked about this in a podcast.
And the PoE one, yeah.
Yeah, the PoE one. I mean, we took our bumps over that. But I think what people lack to see and realize is how hard those teams worked to fix that. So it wasn't this, our PoE is broken, we'll just sell another switch. No, that's not what happened. It was a massive effort across the board by multiple people, engineering, product, tech marketing. Everybody jumped in and they're like, let's fix this. And let's fix it now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And that's one of the things where, I know you do it, I do it, I know our peers do it. That's where you take pride in your work. You take pride in a product that you're putting out there to make sure that everyone's happy. And when you go home at night, you're like, man, we worked our butt off to fix that.
Yep. And with things like stacking, we learned a lot of things early on. So if we go back, many years, on some of the older fast iron platforms, when we first put in stacking, we went the same direction as a lot of the other vendors. We had proprietary stack ports on there that were copper, and you had just a few inches of reach,
Yep.
And we also had where, like, okay, if you're using X model, then you can stack up to 4. If you're using Y model, you can stack up to 6. If you're using Z model, you could stack, maybe 8.372. It was just this big conglomeration of, look up column A and row B, and then maybe figure out what's going on.
Yep.
So kind of as we've moved forward, they've gone, no, let's take it a step back. Let's simplify this. Let's make it where we're not going to do it based around proprietary connectors, number one. And that opened up new games to us that we didn't even think about going into it.
Yeah.
So not only does that mean that as a customer, you don't have to buy proprietary cables, but that also means that we can do long distance stacking. So unlike most other vendors, and unlike something like a chassis, if I'm in a hospitality environment, for example, I can have, let's say 2 ICXs that are every, second or third floor. And all of that is still in one stack. So it's all still managed as one unit, even though it's not physically sitting in a row or a stack or a single wiring closet someplace. And that gives you immense flexibility as a customer. And it's not just the distance between floors. This can be around a university campus. It can be several kilometers in length. So really opens up a lot of possibilities. And we also simplified from the perspective of saying just like, okay, make it all 12. Forget
Right.
this whole, 4 for this model, 6 for this model, 8 for that model. We just made it 12 across the board. So it's much simpler to understand, how do I get the right units to meet my needs?
And you took the algebra out of it. So you're no longer trying to put all this, like, I can stack this with this. And even the old FCX, you had long preamble and short preamble. And I mean, I can't even count how many people that bit. It's bitten me before.
Yep.
So you take all of that out of the equation, you baseline it, standardize it, and you just make it simple.
Yeah. Yep. So that kind of gives us our base to start from, so that is a stack. It's taking multiple, what previously would have been standalone units, fixed form factor devices, however you want to say it. We stack them together to make them a single managed unit. All switching takes place locally on each of the individual units themselves. So just like line cards in a chassis, those decisions are made locally. Well, I guess that depends on the vendor of the chassis, but in this case, it's all local decisions. And then we start kind of going out from that into what are some of these other technologies. So why don't we kind of shift from that into a campus fabric, since they do relate to each other.
Well, and you talked about long distance stacking, so it's a good segue.
Yeah. Yep. And so a campus fabric actually utilizes a stack at its core. So a campus fabric is a combination of stacking technology and what's called port extension or port extenders. So you're actually going to create a stack which will be called your overall control bridge. So that's going to be a collection of 76, 77, 78, 50 that are going to make all the forwarding decisions for your traffic, as well as be that centralized point of management.
Okay.
So now I can take that. Now I can add a whole bunch of additional ICXs at the edge that are port extenders.
Yep.
So some of the big differences start to come in here in that, you can stack up to 12. But with a campus fabric, there can be up to 32 port extenders.
So do me a favor.
Mm-hmm.
Sell me on this on something outside of the fact that you get a single point of management.
Oh, absolutely. Well, no, it's, it's a single. No, I'm going to say single point of management, but it's a single point of management with immense port density.
There you go.
Because in a stack, and I would say we're doing high port density in a stack. You're doing up to 12 units. Once you shift that to a campus fabric, you change that conversation. Then now you're doing not up to 12, but up to 32 at the edge, up to 4 at the core. And those 4 at the core can also provision edge connectivity or connectivity to the routing environment upstream. So you got, the port density just goes through the roof. Even when you compare it with, large, highest scale chassis-based systems, blows that out of the water.
Yep.
So that's one of the really big factors there. The other one is if you're doing stacking, as we mentioned earlier, stacking is within a sub-family. So I can stack up to 12 74 50s together, regardless of whether they're PoE, non-PoE, 24-port, 48-port, regardless of which sub-member they are of those families.
Yeah.
But I can't stack, let's say, 2 7750s and 3 7450s and 4 7150s together into a stack.
Which is known as mixed stacking.
Yeah. Yep. And we had that briefly in the 6000 family, but it was very restrictive.
Yeah.
It was just like, okay, up at the core, it is just this unit, and down at the edge, it's only this unit. And so it was very restrictive in nature. So this kind of fits that mold. But it gives you a lot more flexibility because all those port extenders, those can be mixes of 71, 72, 7450. Now your control bridge layer, that does have to be consistent because that is a stack.
Yep.
So it's either, up to 4 7650s or up to 4 7750s. But the cool thing here is even if you were doing a stack that was going to be a lower number of overall units, let's say it was going to be 10 units in total, and you wanted the capabilities of 7750. That means you've got to stack 10 7750s together.
Yep.
Which, is great, but it's fairly expensive, and it may be cost prohibitive for some customers.
Yeah.
Now, if you do that as a campus fabric instead, so now I've got 2 7750s that are in a stack together to kind of act as that control bridge layer, and my actual port extenders where I'm doing that edge connectivity, that can be 7450s, 7250s. That can be something that is much, much, much cheaper on a per port basis. So we're getting the density with an enhanced feature set at a much lower price point.
Yep.
But then, so now that we say that kind of brings the question like, well, then why the heck do you have stacking anymore? like, okay, you just sold me on campus fabrics. So what's the point of still having stacking outside of it just becoming your control bridge layer?
Right.
Well, not every environment makes sense for a campus fabric. And it goes back to that earlier point, which was the forwarding decisions are made at the control bridge layer. So in a stack, every switch, it's making all the switching decisions locally.
Right.
When you get to a campus fabric, those port extenders, those are actually just adding a tag to that traffic. Again, detail on all this is out there in the free available training classes at training.ruckuswireless.com, because otherwise this becomes a 6-hour podcast, and we probably don't want that.
Yeah.
But we're going to add a tag to that so that the upstream control bridge can recognize which port in VLAN did this come in on. So all of your MAC learning, forwarding decisions, all that happens at the control bridge layer. So it is going to add latency if you had both of the edge devices attached to the same device down at the edge. So then you might be saying, oh, well, that sucks. Why do I want to use this? Why don't I stay with a stack?
Yep.
Totally depends on what you're doing.
It does.
If you are in a data center and you've got a number of applications that you've got, the front end of that application is running on one server and 2 other servers in a rack make up the database that's the back end of that application, and you've got a lot of east-west traffic flows that are taking place, you don't want to do a campus fabric. You don't want that additional latency of going up to the control bridge, having it do all the MAC learning and forwarding decisions, and then going back down to the port extender.
Yeah.
You want to stack in that scenario. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's one of my favorite things about all of this is you can build technology solution for almost anything. And we do that actively, right?
Yeah.
But we also build them around the human element. And what I mean by the human element is there's some people that are just dead set in their ways, and they want to have 2 uplinks out of an access switch going to your distribution layer, and that's it. That's all I'm dealing with. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And you deal with north, south, east, west traffic, and we're still building solutions that allow people to engineer their network around that and implement whatever type of technology they want.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
So it's I don't know, to me it's kind of a comforting thing to where you can buy a product and put it in your network and then build it, deploy it, engineer it, whatever you want to call it, any way you want. That gives you that level of comfort, right? I mean, you don't go home and walk into your house and think, I hate this place. I want this different and that different and that different. Because if you do, you change it.
Well, you might,
Well, yeah, you may. But you're also afforded the ability to modify things as you see fit. And
absolutely.
And that's one of the great things about this. So,
yeah. And, and it all has its very specific use cases, like if you are, and the truth is kind of in the name, Campus Fabrics. It didn't say Data Center Fabrics. That wasn't the title there.
Right.
And if you're dealing predominantly with your user base, whether that is, in hospitality, whether that's in medical, whether that's in a traditional enterprise, how much of your traffic is east-west traffic flows?
Right.
Unless you've got some kind of a weird virus that's self-replicating and propagating through your systems, it should be almost none.
Right.
Keep in mind that people sending email to each other, that doesn't go east-west. That goes from the user to the server and then back down to the next user.
Yep.
Same for IMs, for Skype calls, for any of the above, So 99% of your traffic is going from your user to their gateway and then out to the data center where those services are held. So you're not adding any additional latency at all in those scenarios.
Right.
Because none of that traffic is east-west. It's all going to have to come up and come out of their VLAN, of their broadcast domain. It's all going to have to go out of there anyway and talk to the services that they're accessing, and then that data is coming back in.
And we harp on that a lot. And it's one of those things when you're 13 years old and you come home and your parents are harping on you about, did you do your homework? Did you do this? Did you do that? We do that to an extent with standards and understanding, where's your gateway? Where's your root bridge? Where is all this stuff?
Yeah.
And this really kind of lays
what
into
do your data flows look like?
Yeah, that's why. I mean, you look at, so a friend of mine, he works for a company, manages a massive network, and they had a vendor that was going to come in and look at it, and they asked him, what are your traffic flows? And he and I had the conversation, and I said, you should just turn around and tell him north, south.
Yeah.
Like if you don't understand it's north, south, then you don't belong in this room.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you gotta do that prep work when you're designing a solution, and that's when it comes into what we're saying here. Do I choose A, B, or C? That's your dependencies is what does your traffic look like? What kind of devices are being connected to this network?
Yeah.
And it should greatly simplify that decision process of A, B, or C, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people aren't sitting there in an office or cubicle or whatever environment, and they're not sitting there opening NetBIOS shares to the guy sitting in the desk next to them all day long. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
So that north-south piece becomes, it's almost eye-opening.
Well, if they're still doing Windows for work groups, they have deeper problems than, yeah.
Yeah. Please call us. Let us help you.
Yeah.
But that also kind of ties into it because, you think about it this way. You, myself, millions of other people can sit down and help you engineer and architect and network correctly, right?
Yeah.
But you also have to get somebody out of this little corner or bucket that they're living in to realize the value of it. And that's where something talking about traffic flows will start to resonate, because I don't truly believe that you can take everybody and sit them down and say, you have to do this because it makes sense. You have to do this because this is how your traffic flows. This is what's happening. And once you paint that picture, then they're like, oh, now I get it, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's really what this stuff is doing. And traffic engineering has been around forever, but there's a subset of people that understand it, and there's a subset of people that sit there and work diligently to make sure that their traffic flows are working correctly. And that's the nuts and bolts of things, where you're getting into it saying, okay, I mean, we have an end-to-end solution, right? We can sell you a cable, we can sell you an access point, and we can sell you a switch. We can sell you a controller. We can sell you all that stuff. It doesn't mean that you're going to go out and deploy it and all of your traffic is magically going to start flowing the correct way. It doesn't work that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep.
You know? So.
Well, and you got to make sure you're buying the right things. I mean, it's good to, and whether you're kind of getting an idea of what's going on using something like S-Flow in the environment or something like that, understanding those traffic patterns at the beginning of your planning process is going to greatly inform what you're buying. Make sure you're not overpaying for the products you're going to deploy. Make sure you're getting the right things that are going to match your solution and give you the best network, not only from a traffic flow perspective, but also from an admin overhead perspective, because that's a huge piece. Yep. And that's one of the big pieces behind, the two that we've talked about so far. Is like Stacks versus Campus Fabrics. Is like, sure, you can do this exact same thing with all these individual units, but now you got to manage each one of them separately. You got to configure each one of them separately. There's a lot more administrative overhead that comes into that process. So, getting you the best solution that's not going to make you tear your hair out managing it every day as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it is the administration. I guess you could call it overhead, but it's a huge piece of it because people still have to manage this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you're in a position to where, and I've said this previously, and I'll harp on this until somebody sticks me in the ground. We're in a certain sense, we're spoiled now. We're not spoiled. We're smarter. That's a better way to put it. We have features, functions, technology that didn't exist, but exist now because we've learned from our mistakes, right? Take DHCP snooping, for example.
Yep.
That stuff exists now because somebody woke up one day and said, I'm so sick of my pager going off at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, all of that stuff exists now. So you have this management aspect of it. We're actively trying to make our lives easier. And we're actively doing a great job of it. Now, do we sometimes introduce things that are more of a headache? Like, one of the big things now is Ansible and automation.
Yeah.
That, in theory, it's amazing. It's great. In reality, it's difficult because I can't sit there. It can be
complex, and how often are you going to do that task?
Well, exactly. I mean, how often are you going to go out and you're going to change SNMP community strings or interface names? I mean, interface names is typically going to be something that is pretty static. I mean, it's what it's connected to. Are you renaming that stuff all the time? And on top of that, are you going to sit there and turn around and say, okay, Mr. Network Engineer, I now need you to become a Perl or Python expert? Like, that, there's a big gap there. You can't just jump over that canal and all of a sudden you're there.
Yep. Yeah. And so, and it's ever evolving, because I mean, and you say kind of like we're spoiled today, and I mean that you can take that analogy back a long ways, because what is, I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
This sounds fun.
Oh yeah, get ready. What is the widest distributed application in the world?
Oh man. So let me think about this. The widest distributed application. If you asked me a protocol, I could probably give you somewhat of something that sounded like an intelligent answer. But if you're asking application, I'm going to say...
I'll give you a hint. It's tied very closely to a protocol.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I mean, I don't know. You tell me. I don't want to sound stupid. This is recorded.
Yeah. Ping.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So, and you're talking about that, how we learned because we're sick of pulling our hair out kind of thing.
Yeah.
Ping was written by a network administrator that was really sick of tearing his hair out trying to figure out like which hosts are online, which hosts are not offline, or are not online. How do I diagnose that? And so he wrote a simple application in C that used ICMP echo and echo reply messages to be able to let you get insight into that, be able to let you control when an echo message is sent and show you on the screen when the echo reply came back in, or if it came back with something else like host unreachable, network unreachable, any of the above, so throughout the whole history of, networking and most technologies, that is absolutely true, that these things come out of, us as administrators going insane. And, by the way, that admin actually figured out his problem before he finished writing Ping, but he finished writing it anyway because he knew that those problems were going to happen again, So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, and how often do, network engineers, everybody, we have actively solved other people's problems? Because, and this isn't to single, like, I'm not singling sysadmins out saying you're stupid. That's not what I'm saying.
So you're looking for, for downvotes out there from all the sysadmins, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're trying to start a war here.
And I'm staring down the barrel of a shotgun, and I know that. But the difference is we have tools at our disposal that are more readily available to help isolate those issues than they do.
Yeah.
And which there's truth in that, and there's some lacks in that too. I mean, you can run a TCP dump and you can figure out what's going on, but we're also acting as the middleman. So we have a viewpoint into all of that. And, in my operations role, it used to drive me nuts when I'm sitting there troubleshooting an active issue for somebody that is absolutely application related.
Oh yeah.
But then you get over that hump in a hurry and you realize that they can't troubleshoot it to that degree because they don't have that viewpoint into the middle.
Yeah.
And that's where we come in and we shine and we're like, here's what's going on. This is what's happening. Like, oh, okay. And then they work the end-to-end problem and they figure it out.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
So,
and there's lots of cool things with ICXs that help with that a hell of a lot too. And it's not directly related to the topic of the day, but things like ACL based mirroring is something that I think is just so amazing on our platforms, that instead of just going out and mirroring a port and getting all the traffic off that port, we can go into a standard or extended ACL and specifically hone in on an individual type of traffic or traffic between two hosts and use the mirror condition on those lines in an ACL to say, I want to capture only this relevant traffic and send it out another port where I can, grab that and look at it and pull it up in Wireshark. And there's lots of kind of innovative feature sets on the ICX that really simplify and help a lot with that problem isolation process, whether it's something within the network or something like you're saying on the server, the sysadmin side, that they don't necessarily have the insight directly to be able to do. And we can really hone in very quickly on this is what's going on and this is how we can show it, and very efficient ways of getting at that.
So on that point, I'm going to give education another shout out, because there are courses that we have that go into this.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So anybody that's interested, the ICX 390 will actually sit down and teach you. You have a user sitting at their desk and they can't pull a DHCP address. Well, you're going to build an access list that's going to show you inbound and outbound traffic and log it, and then do accounting on it to show you what's going on in that traffic flow.
Yep.
So you can see it both directions, right? Which piece is broken? Your host is not sending something, or the server's not sending something. And I mean, that ties into the myriad of ways that you can troubleshoot this stuff, because you can sit down, and my favorite thing in the world to troubleshoot was TCP issues, because it's easy. You just telnet to the host IP address and the port number, and if it returns a blank screen, guess what? The port's open and it's listening.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, you have a problem, and then you have to start to work that problem back.
Either that service is not up, or you got a firewall blocking it somewhere in the middle, or it's expiring in transit, any of the above. But yeah, it immediately tells you should it work or not. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can even look at issues like asynchronous routing, right? You're going out one firewall, but the traffic's returning through the other one. Well, you can't solve that from a router that you don't have visibility into. And why I say that is because you're going to look at your egress point, and in that trace route, it's going to fail, but you don't know where it failed because it's coming back somewhere, and the firewall is going to kill ICMP traffic anyways. So because you could call me lazy or smart, I would just call the firewall guy and say, hey, do you see this traffic coming in over here? And he's like, yep, I sure do. I'm like, okay, I'll call the customer and tell them to route it different.
Yeah. Yep.
We took a huge left turn from stacking.
We did. We did, most definitely.
Well, that's what happens, right?
Yeah. Yep. And, so if we want to grab that steering wheel and rip it back over to the right, I think the last one we wanted to get here was MCT, because again, it's at a surface level, very similar. The whole idea is you got two devices in this case, so not 12, not 36, but two. And those two devices are going to appear the same from a link aggregation group perspective. That I can have a lag that crosses both of these members, and it fools the downstream device into thinking it's connecting to just one switch upstream. So if we can already do it up to 12 and we can already do it up to 36, why do we want to do it to 2?
Exactly. And
again, doesn't it seem like a step back? Yeah. Well, you've got to look at kind of a big focus of stacking and a big focus of Campus Fabrics is with both of these technologies, we are centralizing everything from an admin perspective. MCT is the polar opposite. MCT it is decentralized from an admin perspective. These are two totally separate entities, which again, you kind of come at potentially and say, wait, is that a step backwards?
Right.
Like, wait, didn't you say we wanted less administration? What are you trying to pull here?
Yep.
So let's kind of take a example of an environment that has very little ability to handle any, downtime. Now, I'm not talking unplanned, I'm talking planned, like a maintenance window. And I've got a stack deployed. I can upgrade the software on that stack using what we call ISSU. Mm-hmm. But there's a limit there. What's the limit?
Well, you're still going to take a power hit, so that's your limit, to me. So if you're doing an ISSU, you're actively upgrading software and minimizing that impact, but you're still taking a hit like you're talking about.
Well, an ISSU is only for patches.
Right.
It's only for patch level updates.
Yeah.
So ISSU reloads the operating system, but it doesn't reload the ASICs.
Yeah.
So the forwarding ASICs stay online. They continue making, forwarding decisions, continue letting the traffic flow. But if you're going between major revisions, we've got to hit those ASICs as well. We have to do a full reload. That is not something where ISSU can be applied. So now we're kind of outside of that boundary of I can make this be a zero or almost zero impact. Now we need a maintenance window in order to do that update when it's a major version upgrade.
Right.
With MCT, because they're still independent, I can update the first one, and we test MCT between the versions to ensure that the MCT cluster still forms and operates, even though there is a version mismatch. In Campus Fabrics and stacking, they all have to be the same version, the exact same version, because you're centralizing that management function. They are all the same device logically.
Yep.
So here, we're still two different devices.
Yeah, so that's the key thing is and it's been misunderstood in certain areas. Mm-hmm. When you deal with MCT, you are not singly managed. It's not taking two independent devices and singly managing them. They're still independently managed, rightfully so because of what you're explaining.
Mm-hmm. Well, and not only that, but I mean, and it's counterintuitive, but a lot of the same customers that have that same requirement for, we don't have any maintenance windows, or if we do have them, they exist like, once every 2 years. For those customers, which a lot of times that's in like, medical fields, things like that. A lot of times people think immediately their thoughts go towards finance and banks. Mm-hmm. Most banks don't care if they do maintenance on a Saturday morning at 2:00 in the morning. They don't want it going down Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, but they're okay with a maintenance window sometime over the weekend. But
don't
if you're
mess with me when I'm moving my millions.
Yeah, no doubt. But if you're a hospital and you've got to be, tracking people's respiratory and everything like that over that network, there is no maintenance window for that,
right.
And so that allows you to have that core, the aggregation distribution layer of that network, where I can update it when one is upgrading, all the traffic's flowing through the other. When it gets done upgrading, it goes back to spreading across the two. Then I can upgrade the other one independently. And those same environments for that layer of their network, many of those environments don't want the, making it all into one administrator device, because they don't want a single mistake made by a single administrator to bring it down either.
Right.
So they actually kind of like the fact that I need to log into Unit A and make my change. And if I did something wrong, it is still going to flow through Unit B.
Yep.
So there are environments that are, much more amenable to the additional admin and actually want the additional, administrative task there as a, an additional safety layer, an additional check.
So do me a favor, because like so many things in life, you have corrected my thinking in this. So I come from a telco operations background, and they built things redundant, diverse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't not make a phone call, right?
Yeah.
So I was always of this mentality of, if I'm going to build something redundantly, I also have to build it diversely. Meaning I have to have a separate path, a separate card, a separate failure point that's not going to bite me if one fails.
Yes. Yep.
And so we've had very fun, colorful conversations around Keep Alive VLANs.
Yeah.
And I admit this, I was errant in my approach to it, to where I didn't have that diversity in there to say, I don't have a modular chassis. I can't attach my Keep Alive VLAN to a separate card.
Yeah.
Because you talked about ASICs earlier. Well, an ICX switch, the ASIC is all 48 ports. I mean, there's not individual ASICs in there for port groups.
Yeah. So
to me, the Keep Alive VLAN was, first of all, you have to think about this and say, you're sitting there dealing with a 48 port switch that's running at a distribution layer, right?
Yeah. Or core, either way.
Or core, wherever it lives. But at the same time, I look at it from the standpoint of an access switch is probably going to fail before a link on an access switch is going to fail before a core distribution layer, which is still incorrect, and I understand that. But you look at a Keep Alive VLAN, and I'm only looking at it from the perspective of where's the diversity in there, instead of looking at the benefit of having it and what it performs. So for somebody stubborn like myself, you can sit down and explain this in a way that will help everybody understand that.
Okay. And to me, when it comes to the Keep Alive VLAN, the Keep Alive VLAN is not really, it's not about port level redundancy. So let me kind of get that out of the picture to begin with. So in my view, it is not a concern of the ICL interface is going to go down, because you probably should be using a link aggregation group for your inter chassis link. And I know it's weird to use the term inter chassis link between two standalone devices, but there we are.
Yeah.
So your ICL is what carries the main control traffic that allows MCT to operate. And it's also what would carry any cross traffic that needs to go between the members, and does like what we call MDUP, the MAC Database Update Protocol, that synchronizes MAC addresses between those two peers. Like all that kind of stuff happens over that ICL or interchassis link. Now, the keep alive is a protection mechanism, so that if, and most of the times when it's stated, it says if the ICL goes down, we use the keep alive to have an election process to determine which of those two MCT nodes should continue forwarding traffic, because you absolutely don't want both of them to try to do that simultaneously when they cannot synchronize their MAC address tables, when they cannot synchronize things like externally facing spanning tree states for those link aggregation groups. You could propagate loop-like behavior. You can generate a broadcast storm. Even in best case scenario, you may have, weird MAC flapping and learning issues going on in the environment. So you definitely don't want the split brain scenario where they can't communicate with each other and they're still both trying to actively forward traffic at the same time. So kind of scaling that back a little bit and saying that it's not a link failure that I'm really worried about. That's not really the reason why I'm pushing to implement this Keep Alive VLAN and this secondary communication path for this election. It's protection from an idiot administrator like myself that, maybe went in there and disabled the wrong interface. And so they actually disabled lag 12, which is the ICL, and if you didn't have a Keep Alive VLAN and you had done it in kind of its factory default state of a loose isolation behavior, now you've got a split brain scenario.
Yep.
And it also, and this is a very rare circumstance, so let me preface it with that, but if for any reason the cluster communication protocol failed, another layer of redundancy that's in here is that election that takes place over the Keep Alive VLAN is not dependent on cluster communication protocol. It's totally independent from that protocol suite.
Yep.
So if CCP failed between the two peers, it still has a way to say, oh, crap, I can't talk to my neighbor. Let me try to reach out over this Keep Alive VLAN, see if they're still there, do my election process. If they're not there, I'm going to continue forwarding traffic because it may just be we're doing a major version upgrade. The other peer is in it, it's in its reboot process. So I'm going to keep forwarding that traffic and keep actively, being the one place for that traffic to go through. If you don't have that Keep Alive VLAN, that split brain is a worst case scenario, and that could be in CCP failure, could be an idiot administrator like myself disabling the lag. It could be those types of scenarios, far more likely than losing both of the links that were in the lag simultaneously because of media, SFPs, things like that.
I'm going to open an RFP with engineering. And I'm going to ask them to rename the Keep Alive VLAN to Map Proof.
Okay, fair enough. Well, but then, we do have customers where MAT doesn't work, so.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I'm not even going to argue that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, safety nets all day long, and
absolutely. And again, look at the customer profile. That we're not talking stacking, we're not talking campus fabrics, we're not talking those things towards the edge, and we are talking the type of customer that really needs to ensure that this is up all the time, and that they can't even have a planned maintenance window. So that target customer that is looking at deploying MCT, utilizing an additional link as a safety mechanism, that is not out of bounds for that customer.
Right.
It could be out of bounds, absolutely, for the customer that is creating a 4-device 7150 stack. They need every port they're buying. They are very price sensitive and conscious.
Yep.
The customer that's deploying MCT, that's not their biggest concern. Their biggest concern is the impact in what is going to happen if they have a network outage because of a split brain scenario. And that way outweighs, having one additional link that sits in between there as a safety net.
Yep. And it's so funny. If you've never been through this, you haven't been doing this long enough, but something's broke. Your boss, your VP, your customer, whoever is on the phone and breathing down your neck saying, fix it.
Yeah.
this is one of those scenarios to where you go in and you're in a massive panic and you're in a hurry and you're like, oh no. And then all of a sudden you take something down and guess what? You just made the problem worse.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, this will prevent you from making that problem worse. And that's really the big piece of it.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I don't miss those days.
No doubt.
So for anybody that's going through that, dealing with it, I have the utmost respect for you because we've all been there, we've all been through it, and it's not fun. I mean, you want to take your day-to-day operation and make it stressful. Get in a situation to where something's broken and you don't know why. And you're going to find out why, but initially you're like, what is going on and why is this broken? And
and a mission critical component of the business.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's where stress is born right there. And I know you've been through it. I've been through it. And I think anybody listening to this has as well. It's not a fun situation to be in, but we've also learned and grown and adapted to understand that there are a lot of measures we can put in place to mitigate that. And we're doing a great job of it on a day-to-day basis. But you can't solve for every possible scenario either. I mean, you talked about a virus that's spreading east to west. You can't plan for that. I mean, you can't build a network to be resilient against that because the network's job is to carry the traffic. It doesn't care what the traffic is. It's just going to carry it.
Yep.
So you can't mitigate everything.
Yep. Well, and there's always new attack vectors. There's always, I mean, you can kind of pre-build for what's already been seen and what's already known out there, what's already happened, but you can't plan for the types of attack vectors that have not been deployed previously.
Because we're sitting here trying to engineer and develop networks to be, performance proof, right? Like they just run and they run great, and then you've got some smart ass sitting somewhere else trying to figure out how to break them.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, which,
and sometimes it comes out of, sometimes it comes out of the tools that make the network the most effective, is what generates kind of those attack points, so, whether that is, someone being able to, grab a host in the data center and throw an OSPF daemon onto it and act as if they were a router and learn your overall route tables or starting to send poison routes into your tables, which is the reason why you want to actually use authentication with OSPF and why you don't want edge-facing interfaces to be responding to hellos, but in many cases, it is those things that make our life easier become the points where attack may take place.
You reach a point with your network growth where I think a lot of people's mentality, and mine as well, is I own this and manage it. So I don't have to worry about little nuances like that. I mean, do I really need to deploy OSPF authentication in my data center? Well, at a certain point, yes, you do, because your user base has grown to a point where it almost becomes critical. Does it become more management heavy? Initially, yes, because you have to go out and configure OSPF authentication to make sure that nobody can just tie into it and poison your routing table. But does it save you a ton of headache on the back end? Yes, it does. And there are proponents for it both ways, right? Some people will say, no, I own and manage this network, and the only person that's going to plug a Spirent or an Ixia port into my network is me, and I'm smart enough to not do that. Okay, well, I hope you're smart enough to not accidentally load the wrong test file as well, right?
Yeah.
So you get both sides of that, and I just think that we've built so many safeguards and mechanisms to protect ourselves from ourselves that it's you almost just have to put that in there,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting old and grumpy and I'm the old guy yelling at the cloud. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, and yelling at the cloud has a totally different viewpoint in our industry.
Just don't get me started. It does. I mean, we've all yelled at it before, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Anyways. Well, if you're not seriously considering stacking or Campus Fabric or MCT, I would sit here and put myself out there and be a proponent for the fact that you should at least look at them. So look at it from a traffic engineering perspective. What's flowing through your network, and how can you better engineer it? Because if you can build a more sturdy, robust network that allows you to ensure that all of your traffic is flowing correctly in I guess you could call it a technology subset that allows this, you need to look at it. Because as protocols advance, as people advance, as technology advances, networks are advancing as well. And there's a way that you can sit down and make all of this better. And it's going to allow you to, kind of take a step back and think, wow, this thing works. Like, it just works. Yep. You know what I mean? And we've talked about, look at YouTube, for example, right? We teach multicast to the nth degree. And YouTube to my computer here, or my son's computer, or my daughter's, or whoever's using it, that's unicast traffic back to them. But within that data center, it's not. So you have to sit there and look at what specific traffic types you're dealing with to engineer around it. And all of these different technologies allow you to do that.
Well, and that comes into like cable provisioners and comes into, hospitality, things like that, where you've got a lot of, multicast that's pushing out is all the digital channels, so, we've got, whether it's 20 or 80 or 100 of them, those are all multicast streams that are going out to that user base, and yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Well, and we've seen this firsthand. I mean, when we started doing a lot of work with the hospitality partners, I know myself, I had to kind of wrap my head around what they were doing initially, because, and by the way, whatever we did with that courseware was awesome. I mean, in my own personal opinion, you get half a day of lecture, half a day of lab. That really resonated because it didn't decimate their support floors. They were able to sit down and go through a day of learning, and they learned a lot. But when we sat down and started breaking down the traffic types that were going through that network, I mean, wow. You look at hotels just in general, they have tons of traffic going through there. I mean, you and I can show up and sit in our room and pull up Amazon Prime or Netflix or whatever and start watching that video traffic, or you can sit down and turn your TV on. Well, now you're dealing with a whole different traffic type.
Yep.
And they very carefully and systematically built these networks around all of that to understand it. And it's really impressive.
Yep. Well, and especially when you get into ones that also have an attached convention center and the changing needs that brings into it, and the, how adaptive they have to be to, whatever type of event is being run there on any given weekly or daily basis. It's pretty incredible. So,
yeah, and you're dead right. I mean, if you sit there and look at it, we can sit here and talk about engineering traffic all day long, and we can look at bits and bytes that are passing through a switch, but you have to take a step back from that and look at the sheer scale of certain things. So like you said, a convention center, how many people are in there attached to your Wi-Fi? I mean, that's a huge number. And when you look at that number, you not only have to have all of these people simultaneously connected to it, but you have to make sure that you don't have a bottleneck built somewhere.
Yep. Well, and how much of their, if it's a convention that is using a lot of digital displays and, is everything that's being displayed there, is that passing, locally to that network? Is that being driven from somewhere else? There's, so many places where those traffic profiles and behaviors can significantly change. So, yep.
One thing I want to see the inside of is esports. So you take an esport arena, and the last thing you want is a top-ranked gamer yelling at you because he got into some latency scenario to where he died, and loses a match because your network failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
I won't mention specific vendors, but there was and vendors, I mean by, software companies, not our direct competitors, but, there was an event just a couple weeks ago where a relatively recently, let's say, upgraded older game, their servers were crashing several times, and a player that was ahead like 3 matches that all ended up crashing out, ended up losing.
Yeah.
And you don't want that tied to your network locally, or tied to your particular game or service on the back end. So, yep.
Right. Yeah, and I guess to you and I, because we both play video games, that's a reasonably resonating thing. But then on the flip side of that, take that exact same network scenario and stick it in a hospital, like you were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
This
absolutely.
is where you run into actual dire circumstances, and you can't have that. You just can't. So it takes a lot of care and feeding and review and analysis of things to make sure that they're set up and propped up the correct way.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. We could go on about this all day long.
No doubt.
So, all right. Well, Brian, this has been, this is so much fun. I just absolutely love this. We're going to continue to do this. And one thing that I don't think we've decided on is what we're going to name it. So we're going to talk about that on the side, but this is going to be a separate series to the Ruckcast podcast, and we're going to continue to do this. And I personally feel like it's going to be very well received because in my personal experience, I guess, I don't get a lot of open forum discussion around networks and what they can do, how you can make them better, what's wrong with them, how you look at them. And hopefully this kind of bridges that a little bit and allows people to open up conversations and start taking a different look at some of this different stuff that we offer.
No doubt.
Couldn't agree more. Well, Brian, thank you. We'll be back here again soon with more.
A pleasure as always, my friend.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. And we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks. See you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Ruckcast. If you just found us for the first time, be sure to follow or subscribe on your platform of choice so you can be notified of future episodes. If you have ideas for future episodes or can't find Ruckcast on your favorite platform, contact us at ruckcast@comscope.com. And as always, thanks for listening.